In the early morning hours of Friday, June 13th, 2025, Israel launched military strikes against Iran. These strikes were from aircraft flown from Israel and reportedly drones smuggled into Iran and launched near their targets. These targets were primarily nuclear facilities and top Iranian nuclear scientists, but also included multiple top Iranian military leadership. Since these strikes were launched, Iran responded with a wave of attack drones on Israel, concentrated on Tel Aviv. Most were intercepted by the Iron Dome and, reportedly, the US military, but some ordnance did strike their targets. The conflict has only escalated since then, as I write this 5 days since the first Israeli strikes. From the very beginning, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has characterized these strikes as preemptive, highlighting an imminent threat from the Iranian nuclear program to Israel's survival. I personally do not buy this because of how many top Iranian military leadership members were targeted in the first day of strikes. That isn't just countering the nuclear program, that's targeting the military and government itself. Fortunately, we have an Israeli official that has outlined the 3 imminent threats to Israel: their development of nuclear weapons, their possession of thousands of ballistic missiles, and their arming of proxies that target Israel. This offers a more complete picture as to the Israeli government's justification of targets. However, in the eyes of international norms, this attack is not justifiable as preemptive. What it would be considered is preventative. That distinction is what this video is about. To broadly generalize, under the current international system, preemptive attacks are viewed as permissible. This is why countries that engage in a first strike will almost always describe it as preemptive, usually pointing to some kind of imminent threat. But under that same international system, there is a general agreement of what qualifies as an imminent threat. We will look to the 3 threats presented by Israel: the Iranian nuclear program, Iran's possession of ballistic missiles, and their arming of proxies. The first on the list, the development of nuclear weapons. There is no internationally recognized standard for the development or even near acquisition of nuclear weapons as being an imminent threat. If this was the case, there probably would have been a conflict between India and Pakistan, as the Pakistani military closed in on testing their first nuclear weapon in the 1990s. Or a half-century before, the USA would have been justified in targeting the USSR to prevent their nuclear weapons program from succeeding. Now, the counter-argument that would get made is one of Iranian leadership wants to wipe Israel off the map. That's their rhetoric, and for many, their actual goal, sure enough. But that isn't unique in the world today. Does China want Taiwan to exist? Does North Korea want South Korea to exist? No. And in both cases, this is a situation where one country has nukes and the other doesn't. Because there is another assumption that should be made when it comes to Iranian leadership. They want to remain in power. Given Iranian actions since Hamas attacked Israel back in October 2023, which included keeping Hezbollah from launching their own offensive into Israel in the aftermath, it is reasonable to conclude that Iran's leadership continuing to be Iran's leadership is their higher priority when weighing against wipe out Israel. Which leads into justification number 2 on that list: Iran's possession of thousands of ballistic missiles. Here again, an enemy's possession of a weapon or weapons that could destroy you is not enough to say your attack is preemptive, and we really don't want to live in a world with that standard. Otherwise, we would have to conclude that a first strike against another nuclear power is actually justifiable. Heck, by the logic presented by Israel, Iran striking Israel first because of Israel's nuclear weapons would also have to be considered preemptive, which, to be clear, I do not agree with. Which brings me to the third justification: Iran's arming of proxies who then use those weapons against Israel. In the realm of international politics, a third power using weapons provided by your adversary doesn't provide justification for a preemptive attack on your adversary. To use that argument would mean Russia targeting the US, Germany, or Poland over arming Ukraine would qualify. To provide an example of a situation where a strong argument for a preemptive attack did take place, we can look to the Six-Day War back in 1967. Here, there were a series of escalations that took place between Egypt and Israel, also Syria and Israel, in early 1967. Starting on May 16th of that year, Egypt's leader, Gamal Abdel Nasser, expelled UN peacekeepers, blockaded Israel's access to the Red Sea, and mobilized military forces. On May 30th, Jordan and Egypt signed a defensive pact, and the following day, Iraq began deploying military forces in Jordan. Israel had begun mobilizing their own forces in response to Egypt's mobilization, and ultimately launched a surprise attack against Egypt on June 5th. So what made this attack by Israel a preemptive strike, as opposed to Israel's recent attack? The military deployment and political actions of Egypt, Jordan, Syria, and Iraq in the weeks leading up to Israel's military strike, especially in the last few days. Those deployments and actions signaled military action from the Arab powers was imminent, and so Israel struck first to gain the upper hand. Now some of you may be asking, but aren't Israel's current actions against Iran also striking first to gain an upper hand? The answer to that is yes. But the specific threats aren't imminent. That is to say, there was no indication Iran had the ability to launch a nuke at Israel in a matter of days or weeks. There was no indication that Iran was preparing a multi-thousand ballistic missile barrage towards Israel. And proxies' behavior on their own isn't enough to argue targeting their sponsor as preemptive. Netanyahu himself kind of gave the game away by acknowledging this attack had been under preparation since October 2024. Preemptive military actions are basically never done on that kind of timetable because the threat has to be imminent. As I said earlier, what Israel actually engaged in was a preventative attack. As the word suggests, it is to prevent an adversary from attaining or maintaining a stronger military, economic, or political position. And this can very much be from legitimate fears of an adversary gaining or maintaining an advantage. Israel and Iran both have existential fear of the other based on the rhetoric espoused by each country's leaders. To repeat again from earlier in this video, in the present international order, preemptive attacks are generally viewed as permissible. Preventative attacks are not, with very good reason. To slide into an international order that treats preventative attacks as acceptable is to slide into a less stable and more violent world. Russia's unrecognized annexation of Crimea was characterized as a preemptive action, though was preventative at best. The United States' invasion of Iraq in 2003 was a preventative action, even as the Bush administration went to great lengths to present it as preemptive. Only one of those actually led to global unified consequences for the aggressor. In the current world, international relations isn't fair, but morally, both Russia and the USA should be condemned for their actions, even if, in Iraq's case, it removed a terrible dictator from power. It's not even about whether either country was actually at risk either. Ukraine wasn't a serious threat to Russia. Iraq was certainly not a threat to the United States. So I'll bring a different example. Taiwan and China. The Chinese government has become increasingly bold about their willingness and, frankly, intentions of seizing Taiwan via military force. Xi Jinping has stated he wants the Chinese military ready to conduct such an operation in 2026. Despite these threats, it would be completely out of step with international norms for Taiwan to militarily strike at China, say by targeting shipbuilding facilities, or even just military airfields and warships, in order to prevent China from attaining the ability to invade, even though China's increasing capabilities in those areas are an existential threat to Taiwan. So under the current international paradigm, what is Taiwan supposed to do about it? Diplomacy. Not necessarily with China, but with other countries. Alliance and support networks with the USA, Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, Indonesia, Taiwan, Singapore, even just ensuring neutrality of some of these countries. One of the steps Taiwan has engaged in is making themselves the microchip manufacturing center of the world, thereby giving virtually every country a stake in Taiwan's continued independence. Another has been their own military buildup, to prevent a successful landing, or at the very least to make the cost of invasion so high, better to not attempt it at all. At present around the world, there are dozens of potential conflicts simmering where at least one party views the other as an existential threat, most of which we in the West are probably not even aware of. One that made headlines in the spring of 2025 was India and Pakistan. Russia and Ukraine is active, but Finland, the Baltic states, and Poland all view Russia as an existential threat. Correctly, in my opinion. Venezuela is a potentially existential threat to Guyana, with the former having claimed over half of the country of the latter. Heck, at present, the United States of America can be considered an existential threat to Canada with the current government in power. The point I am so belabored in making is that just because another country is, or potentially could in the future, be an existential threat, does not justify military action against that country. And when engaging in that military action, especially if it is about keeping an adversary from attaining new capabilities, it isn't a preemptive attack, it's preventative. Fundamentally, if we allow ourselves to slip into a world where preventative military action is the norm, we will be living in a much more dangerous world, for all of us. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button. If you want to hear me talk about history and politics in the future, hit the subscribe and bell while you're at it. In the meantime, I already have several videos posted for you to enjoy or critique, and I invite your input in the comments below. Until next time, take care.